Good evening, community. Although I know this topic is controversial and always divides people in some way, you know that I love witch stories and episodes like this one, where we'll approach it from two very different perspectives. A short, classic story that almost seems like a fable, and a longer one with macabre touches that can make it even more disturbing. I thank those who have shared them, those who have trusted us. And you know, as I always remind you, that if witches don't scare you, listen to this episode perhaps, as mere entertainment. Your time to take it seriously will come, perhaps sooner than you think. It wouldn't be the first time that a skeptic, who laughs at certain topics, ends up being the protagonist of tales of the night. I want to share this story that my husband told me about his family. He is from the city of Reynosa, Tamaulipas, where he was born and grew up with his parents, grandparents, and siblings. It all began when his father, my father-in-law, was very young. He told us that his grandfather, that is, my husband's great-grandfather, was a man very fond of gambling. He liked to spend nights in bars and cantinas, playing, drinking, and betting until the early hours of the morning. As was common in his time, he always carried a weapon with him. It was also common to hear stories about witches, and everyone knew some trick to face them if necessary. On one of those nights, my father-in-law says his grandfather was returning home after a particularly long session. Although he was somewhat drunk, his mind was alert, and looking at the sky, he saw a large owl flying overhead. He didn't feel anything strange at first. He had always liked these animals, and they even said it was good luck to see them. But something changed when he noticed there was something different about this bird. It wouldn't go away. It flew differently and seemed to be following him. It was then that he heard a lament. The sound was low, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It came from the direction of the owl, which now seemed to be moving in circles above him. The man felt a chill, and remembering what his parents had taught him, decided to act. He took out a rope he carried with him. He began making knots and recited the 12 truths of the world. Then he undid the knots, praying backwards, as he had been taught for cases like this. What happened then marked him forever. The owl fell to the ground, but when it did, it was something very different. What fell from the sky was a woman. Surprised, he drew his pistol and aimed it, ready to shoot. But the woman, seeing herself in danger, begged him not to. She told him that she knew what he liked, and that she could help him win at his bets. As long as I am with you, you will always do well. But remember, you will see me as an animal. I will approach you from time to time, and you will not be afraid. The grandfather accepted and went home, forgetting about the matter. Although from that moment on, his luck changed in an incredibly noticeable way. He won every bet he made and never had financial problems again. Everything he obtained at the gaming tables, he would exchange for gold and bury it in his land where they said it would be safe. But over time, strange things began to be noticed in the place. My father-in-law says that his grandfather would go out to the patio at night, light a bonfire, surround the fire with stones, and sit down to talk with someone that no one else could see. His wife said that he claimed these friends always accompanied him, although to her, there was no one else there. He was always alone. When he asked for dinner for everyone, she, to avoid arguing, would serve more food than needed. And it was on one of those nights when everything changed. While my mother-in-law was inside the house, she heard him argue, and then a gunshot in the patio. Don't worry about it. On the ranch, that wasn't unusual. And she thought maybe he had hunted some animal. Shortly after, her husband came in with a rabbit in his hands and said, "Look, daughter, this is for you to make us dinner." The lady, as always, didn't ask questions and prepared the rabbit. The meat was tough, the skin was difficult to pull off, but that night, apparently, something broke. From then on, that grandfather's luck disappeared. Over time, the family came to the conclusion that that rabbit wasn't a simple animal. but the witch who had helped him for years. A witch that he himself had killed without realizing it. Perhaps. Since then, the family didn't talk much about the subject, but the feeling that there are pacts that should never be broken always remained floating in the air. The grandfather's luck never recovered. Now, community, let's move on to a slightly longer story that will leave you thinking. We continue with more stories tonight. Before you listen to these stories, I must warn you of something. These are not common tales. What you are about to hear are fragments of my life, moments that still make my skin crawl when I remember them. These experiences are not stories to entertain, but real encounters with the inexplicable, with something that lurks in the shadows and has no mercy. Since I was little, I discovered a sensitivity that connects me with the unknown, a kind of alarm that activates when something evil is near. This ability I didn't ask for, but I inherited it. And over the years it has been both a curse and a warning. I'm going to tell you about the times I faced something that many call witches. Not those storybook witches with brooms and cauldrons, but something much darker, more ancient, more terrifying. One in my childhood home seemed to want to snatch the life of an innocent being that had not yet been born. The other, in a remote place between mountains, appeared with a similar purpose, pursuing what I didn't know. These stories aren't easy to share. Reliving them brings back the fear, the memories, and that stab in my rib that always warns me when something is wrong. But I share them because I believe it's important for others to know, for others to be alert. Because evil exists, and sometimes it's much closer than we think. Now, if you're ready, I ask you to listen carefully, but do so at your own risk. There are things that cannot be forgotten once you know them. For as long as I can remember, I've had this thing I'm talking about, this gift. Although sometimes I think it's completely a curse. It's an ability that runs in my family. My father calls it the signal. In him, it's a stab in the nape of his neck, like a chill that warns him when something bad is near. In me, it's a burning in my right rib, as if something were warning me that I should flee. But as a child, I didn't understand it. I didn't know I had it until that night in my grandmother's house. And this house was huge, with a yard full of trees that were our refuge during the day. But at night, that place changed. At night, the trees cast strange shadows. At night, the wind sounded as if something were whispering among the branches. The hallway that connected the rooms had no walls or windows. It just opened directly to the yard. And once the sun went down, that hallway sank into total darkness, and to cross it, you had to gather your courage. That night I wanted to sleep in my aunt's room. She was pregnant and my grandmother thought I would make her uncomfortable, but my aunt insisted it wasn't a problem. My younger cousin, who always followed me everywhere, also wanted to stay. He slept on a mattress on the floor, while I shared the bed with my aunt. In the middle of the night, my cousin woke me up. He wanted to go to the bathroom but was afraid to cross the dark hallway alone. I tried to ignore him, to make him go alone, but his pleas almost woke my aunt. And although I was also afraid, I agreed to accompany him. We went out carefully. We closed the door behind us so the cold air wouldn't enter the room. We walked in silence. The only light was that of the moon, barely filtering through the branches. My cousin went into the bathroom and I stayed waiting outside, looking toward the yard. And that's when I saw it. There was a figure on the wall that separated our house from the neighboring property. It was tall, much taller than a normal person could be, because the wall was at least 2 meters high. The figure looked like a woman, but not entirely human. She was thin, almost skeletal, with long black hair that covered her face. Her long arms hung down, and her fingers were very long, like claws that scratched the wall. Although I couldn't see her eyes, I felt she was looking at me. I knew it. My chest tightened, and the burning in my right rib was so intense it almost made me fall. My cousin came out of the bathroom, and when he saw her, he froze. He took my hand trembling and began to cry while stuttering. He started reciting the Lord's Prayer. I didn't know how to pray, but I closed my eyes and asked that nothing would happen to us. I felt as if all the sound around us had disappeared. There were no crickets, no wind, no creaking branches, nothing, just silence, and the certainty that that presence was watching us. When I opened my eyes, I noticed something more terrifying. Her eyes, large and bright, now peered through her hair. They weren't human eyes. There was too much darkness in them, as if they were empty, but still they shone like those of an animal lying in wait. And then she moved. Her head turned toward us, and I felt she was analyzing us like a predator choosing its prey. My cousin squeezed my hand, so hard I thought he was going to hurt me. And I began to feel something strange. It was as if an invisible force was trying to separate us, as if something was pulling at our hands. My heart was about to explode when a warm light illuminated the yard. It was the living room lamp. My uncle had arrived. We ran to him without saying a word. He hugged us, confused. But when we told him what we had seen, his expression changed. He looked at us very seriously and asked, "Did you see her?" My cousin burst into tears again, and I could only nod. Then my uncle, in a tone I'll never forget, told us what was happening. He told us that for weeks, that thing had appeared on the wall or in the yard. That some nights my aunt would wake up terrified because she felt invisible hands squeezing her belly. He confessed that he believed that creature wanted the baby my aunt was expecting. That's why he was looking for a dog to protect the house. Days later, Daisy arrived, a small but brave dog. From the first night, Daisy planted herself in front of my aunt's room and didn't move. She seemed to know there was something to protect. One night, shortly before my cousin was born, I stayed to sleep there again. In the early morning, I was awakened by a loud noise. The tree branches were hitting the tiles violently, as if a storm was about to break loose. But the air was strange, still. Daisy began to bark furiously, and instantly I heard someone trying to open the door to my aunt's room. I jumped out of bed and hugged my aunt, who was barely waking up. The doorknob was moving, as if someone on the other side was desperate to get in. Daisy was barking, and her bark transformed into a low and threatening growl. It was then that I heard footsteps, but not on the ground, rather above on the roof. They were slow, but heavy, as if someone was walking on the tiles. And at this point my rib hurt. My rib was burning. The noise suddenly ceased when my aunt opened her bedroom door. Upon going out to the hallway with a lamp, everything fell silent. Daisy stopped barking and just stood looking at the roof, motionless, as if she could still feel what I also felt in my rib, that thing hadn't completely gone away. When my cousin was born and my aunt moved away, the figure disappeared completely. We never saw her on the wall again, nor felt her presence. But I never forgot those eyes, nor that sensation that I was facing something that shouldn't exist. And I understood that my ability wasn't just any gift, that it was a warning, a door to what others couldn't see, and that I wish I hadn't seen either. It wasn't the last time I had an encounter with those evil beings, with witches. Years later, when I entered university, I moved abroad to study in Spain. There I met who would become my husband. And in September of last year, we got married. As I hadn't seen my family in 2 years since I left, we decided to spend a few weeks here in my country. My relationship with my mother's family was distant, especially after my parents' divorce and because they didn't agree with my marriage. They said I had married too young. That's why we decided to stay with my father's family, who lived in a small town surrounded by forests and mountains. When we arrived, the whole family received us with open arms. The first few days we stayed at one of my aunt's houses. But after a few days, one of my father's cousins invited us to stay at his farm, which was more remote from the town. Both my husband and I thought it was a very good idea, since there were relatives there whom we hadn't seen due to the distance between the farm and the town. However, upon arriving, I really noticed how isolated it was. The road was rough, had no lighting, and although the farm had electricity, the atmosphere was really oppressive. The cold there was much more intense than in the town, and the wind made the trees move in an unsettling way, as if something invisible was pushing them. Despite that, the first day was pleasant. We went out walking with the family and talked about all sorts of things. But that night after dinner, they began to tell stories and legends of the place. They wanted to scare my husband for being a foreigner, and one of the stories immediately caught my attention. It was the legend of a woman who roamed the hills and mountains. They said this woman stalked children and babies to devour them, that she walked on all fours with very thin and deformed extremities that allowed her to move with frightening speed, almost as if she were a spider. Her walk was unmistakable, a heavy sound, like cicadas tearing the wet earth. They called her the Witch of the Hill. As I listened, a shiver ran through my body. That story immediately reminded me of my own encounter with a witch when I was a child. And that night, fortunately, we slept peacefully. But the second night, hell began. It was raining when I was awakened by a noise out there. Something was moving in the mud, dragging itself. The sound was strange, irregular, as if something heavy and clumsy was walking with difficulty. It didn't seem like a dog or any animal I knew. The mere act of hearing it put me on edge. It was then that I felt that damn stab in my right rib, that burning that I've experienced on other occasions throughout my life, and I knew very well what it meant. Something wasn't right. I couldn't sleep that night, and the following ones, the noises continued. The worst part is that they seemed to get closer and closer, as if whatever was causing them was gaining confidence night after night. The pain in my rib didn't disappear either. On the contrary, it was becoming more intense. One of my aunts noticed my tired appearance and asked what was happening. I told her about the noises and the burning in my rib. She remained silent, thoughtful, but didn't tell me anything. A day later, my husband and I went to town to say goodbye to the family. They lent us a truck for the return trip, but we got delayed. Night caught us on the way back, and to make matters worse, that old vehicle broke down in the middle of the journey, in the darkest, most isolated part of the road. We had no choice but to walk to the farm. We turned on our phone lights and began to walk. At first, everything was quiet. My husband and I talked and joked to ease the tension. However, at one point, I noticed that he stopped. He walked somewhat behind me. His face changed. He turned pale. His eyes reflected pure terror. "What? What's wrong?" I asked him. Although deep down I already knew the answer. The burning in my rib was unbearable. There was something behind me, something that shouldn't be there. Before I could turn to look, he took my hand firmly and whispered in a trembling voice, "Run." It was then that I heard it. That sound, the same dragged and heavy footsteps that I had heard at night, were now right behind us, moving, approaching, chasing us. We ran as we could, but I couldn't help turning around in a moment of desperation. And there it was. It was a grotesque figure, naked, with gray and disheveled hair that fell over a cadaverous face. Its extremities were incredibly long and deformed, bent at impossible angles. Its skin was grayish and cracked, as if it were made of dry clay. And the worst were again its empty but bright eyes, fixed on me, as if it knew me, as if it knew something that I still ignored. Its way of moving was unnatural, twisted, and each step seemed like a dry crack that resonated in the darkness. We reached the farm almost breathless. My husband closed the gate and we both ran into the house. The family was awake. They came to us alarmed when they saw us so agitated. We told them what had happened, and while we were talking, a frightening sound broke the silence of the night. Someone, or something, was trying to open the gate. My uncles and cousins went out with machetes and a shotgun in hand. From inside, I heard a shot, followed by a deep silence. At that very moment, the burning sensation in my rib disappeared completely. Later, they confirmed what I feared. They told me it was the witch from the hill. My uncle said she had tried to climb the gate with those deformed limbs, and the shot had scared her away. That night, my aunts, who were very religious, performed a cleansing ritual on my husband and me. But I couldn't stop wondering what that witch wanted with me. The last time I faced one, it made sense. I was just a girl, and she was after the baby my aunt was expecting, but now there was no reason. Weeks later, back in Spain, I knew. I understood. I was pregnant. That witch knew it, even before I did. That's why she had haunted me every night. That's why she pursued me. She wanted my baby. To those who have listened to these stories, I want to thank you for taking the time to know what I have lived through. I perfectly understand that my experiences might seem impossible, but to me, they are as real as the air I breathe. These stories are not just memories. They are warnings. They are scars I carry with me. I have learned that evil doesn't always present itself as a great monster from stories or a shadow in the darkness. Sometimes it's there, lurking, hidden in the cracks of everyday life, waiting for the right moment to finally show itself, to let itself be seen. And when it does, it leaves these marks with us that never go away. What I faced in my childhood made me fear. Respect what we don't understand. But what I lived through years later taught me something even more important. It taught me to protect what I love with every fiber of my being. That witch knew my baby was coming before I did myself. And in her greed, she tried to take it from me. But she didn't succeed. And she won't succeed. Perhaps someday I'll tell the rest of the experiences I've lived through. My encounters with the paranormal, because these haven't been the only ones. I've felt that stabbing pain in my ribs several more times in my life, and each occasion has brought something terrifying with it. Something that has marked me. So thank you for listening to me. And if you'll allow me to tell you something, remember, never ignore that stabbing sensation inside you. That feeling that screams something isn't right. Sometimes it's the only thing that can save you. Your intuition. Your instinct.